Nietzsche is now considered one of the most influential thinkers in modern intellectual history. But during his own lifetime, he was largely ignored. His books sold poorly, his audience was small, his ideas were considered strange, extreme, or simply incomprehensible. When he collapsed in 1889, he was not a famous philosopher shaping public debate. He was a marginal figure, writing for what he believed would be future readers. In a sense, he was right. Nietzsche's influence did not emerge immediately because the conditions required to understand him did not yet exist. Much of 19th century Europe still operated within frameworks he was attacking: religious morality, metaphysical certainty, belief in progress grounded in rational order. His critique seemed excessive. But as the 20th century unfolded, those frameworks began to fracture. Two world wars shattered confidence in moral progress. Traditional religious authority weakened across Europe. Scientific developments altered humanity's understanding of itself. Political ideologies exposed both the power and danger of collective belief. The cultural landscape Nietzsche had diagnosed began to appear. Questions he had raised about nihilism, the death of God, the instability of values, were no longer abstract provocations. They became lived realities. Intellectuals, artists, and psychologists found themselves confronting the very problems Nietzsche had anticipated. This is when his influence accelerated. His works were rediscovered, translated, and debated across disciplines. Thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and social theory recognized that Nietzsche had articulated a crisis that defined the modern condition. He had not simply criticized past values, he had described a future. This delayed recognition explains why Nietzsche's impact feels different from that of many philosophers. He did not found a school in the traditional sense. He did not produce disciples who systematically extended his doctrine. Instead, he influenced a wide range of thinkers who adapted his ideas in different directions. His concepts became tools. The unconscious, the critique of morality, the analysis of power, the instability of truth. These themes appear in multiple fields, often without explicit reference to Nietzsche, yet bearing his imprint. This diffuse influence makes him harder to categorize. He is not confined to a single tradition. He appears across intellectual movements that sometimes contradict each other. Yet the underlying connection remains. Nietzsche provided a language for understanding a world in which certainty had collapsed and meaning had to be rethought. His influence took time because it required history to catch up with his diagnosis. One of the earliest and most striking areas of Nietzsche's influence appears in psychology, particularly in the work of Sigmund Freud. Freud is often credited with discovering the unconscious, the idea that human behavior is driven by forces outside conscious awareness. Desires, fears, and conflicts operate beneath the surface, shaping thought and action in ways individuals do not fully understand. Nietzsche did not develop a formal theory of the unconscious, but he anticipated its logic. Throughout his work, Nietzsche argues that what people call conscious reasoning is often a surface phenomenon. Beneath it lie instincts, drives, and emotional forces that guide interpretation. Moral beliefs, philosophical systems, even claims to truth can be expressions of deeper psychological needs. People do not simply think, they rationalize. This is a direct challenge to the Enlightenment image of the human being as primarily rational. Nietzsche suggests that reason is frequently a tool used by underlying drives, a way of justifying impulses that originate elsewhere. Freud systematizes this insight. In psychoanalysis, symptoms, dreams, and slips of the tongue reveal hidden conflicts. The conscious self is no longer master of its own house. It becomes a negotiation between competing forces. desire, repression, memory, and social constraint. Nietzsche had already described similar dynamics. His analysis of ressentiment shows how suppressed hostility can transform into moral judgment. His concept of bad conscience explains how aggression can turn inward, producing guilt and self-punishment. His critique of morality reveals how values can mask psychological tensions. Freud gives these ideas clinical form. He provides mechanisms, structures, and therapeutic techniques. Nietzsche provides a philosophical diagnosis, a vision of human beings as layered, conflicted, and often opaque to themselves. There are differences. Freud emphasizes sexual drives and developmental stages. Nietzsche focuses more broadly on power, vitality, and cultural forces. Freud aims at treatment. Nietzsche aims at understanding and transformation. Yet the overlap is unmistakable. Both reject the idea that human beings are transparent to themselves. Both see consciousness as only part of the story. Both explore how hidden forces shape identity. In this sense, Nietzsche can be seen as a precursor to depth psychology. He did not create psychoanalysis, but he helped make it thinkable. If Sigmund Freud reveals the unconscious as conflict, Carl Jung expands it into something deeper, and in doing so, comes even closer to Nietzsche. Jung develops the idea of the shadow, the hidden aspects of the self that are rejected, denied, or repressed. These can include aggression, desire, ambition, creativity, anything that conflicts with the identity a person consciously maintains. What is denied does not disappear. It returns in disguised form. This echoes Nietzsche directly. Nietzsche's analysis of ressentiment shows how suppressed hostility transforms into moral judgment. His concept of bad conscience shows how instincts turned inward become guilt and self-punishment. Both describe a psyche divided against itself, where rejected drives continue to operate beneath the surface. Jung gives this structure symbolic form. For Jung, psychological development requires integration of the shadow, not elimination. One must confront what has been denied and incorporate it consciously. Otherwise, it controls behavior indirectly. This is remarkably close to Nietzsche's idea of self-overcoming. Nietzsche does not advocate suppressing instinct. He advocates transforming it. Drives must be brought into order, shaped, refined, not denied. A fragmented self becomes capable of higher forms of creation only when its internal conflicts are integrated. Both thinkers reject moral frameworks that divide the self into pure good and pure evil. Such divisions, they argue, produce repression. Repression produces distortion. Distortion produces psychological instability. Instead, they emphasize confrontation. The individual must face uncomfortable truths about themselves, their desires, their weaknesses, their capacity for both creation and destruction. This process is not easy. It requires honesty, discipline, and the ability to endure internal tension. Jung describes this as individuation. Nietzsche describes it as becoming who you are. There are differences in tone and method. Jung works within a therapeutic framework, using symbols, myths, and archetypes. Nietzsche works philosophically, often without offering structured guidance. Jung aims at psychological balance. Nietzsche often pushes toward intensity and transformation. Yet both converge on a central insight. The self is not unified by default. It must be formed. And that formation requires integrating what has been rejected. In this sense, Nietzsche's influence extends beyond philosophy into the very idea of psychological growth. He did not offer therapy, but he revealed the necessity of it. Nietzsche does not belong to the existentialist movement. It develops after his time, but he is one of its most important precursors. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus inherit a problem Nietzsche made unavoidable. What happens when God is no longer the foundation of meaning? For centuries, moral values, purpose, and truth were grounded in religious frameworks. Human life had direction because it was oriented towards something beyond itself: divine order, salvation, eternal justice. Nietzsche declares that this foundation has collapsed. God is dead does not mean people stopped believing overnight. It means the structure that gave meaning to belief has weakened. Scientific development, historical criticism, and cultural change have eroded confidence in absolute truths grounded in transcendence. The result is a crisis. Without a fixed source of meaning, individuals must confront existence directly. There is no pre-given purpose, no guaranteed moral order, no ultimate justification. This is the starting point of existentialism. Sartre formulates it as existence precedes essence. Human beings are not born with a predefined nature. They must define themselves through their choices. Responsibility becomes absolute because there is no external authority to rely on. Camus approaches the problem through the absurd, the tension between the human desire for meaning and a world that does not provide it. Like Nietzsche, he rejects resignation. The task is not to escape the absurd, but to live within it consciously. Both thinkers develop paths that Nietzsche opened, yet there are differences. Sartre emphasizes freedom and responsibility in a moral framework that still retains a universal dimension. Camus emphasizes lucidity and revolt against meaninglessness. Nietzsche, by contrast, pushes further toward value creation, the idea that individuals must not only choose, but also generate new frameworks of meaning. He is less concerned with ethical justification and more concerned with vitality. Despite these differences, the connection is clear. Existentialism inherits Nietzsche's diagnosis of a world without guaranteed meaning. It grapples with the consequences of that diagnosis in different ways, through ethics, literature, and philosophy. Without Nietzsche, the central existentialist question would not have the same urgency. How should one live when nothing is given? Among 20th century philosophers, few engaged Nietzsche as deeply as Martin Heidegger. For Heidegger, Nietzsche was not just another thinker. He was the culmination of Western philosophy. To understand this claim, we need to recall Nietzsche's critique of truth, morality, and metaphysics. Nietzsche argues that Western thought has long sought a stable foundation, a true world behind appearances, whether in Plato's forms, Christian theology, or rational systems. Heidegger agrees that this tradition has reached a crisis. He interprets Nietzsche as completing the trajectory that began with Plato. By reducing truth to interpretation and exposing values as human creations, Nietzsche dissolves the idea of a fixed metaphysical ground. There is no longer a stable foundation beneath reality. This, for Heidegger, is both an achievement and a danger. It marks the end of what he calls metaphysics, the attempt to explain reality through permanent structures. But it also risks reducing everything to human projection. If all values are created, then being itself may disappear from view. Heidegger reads Nietzsche's concept of the will to power in this light. Rather than treating it as a psychological or political doctrine, he interprets it as a fundamental principle of modernity, a tendency to organize, control, and dominate reality through human frameworks. Technology, science, and industrial society can be seen as expressions of this will. In this sense, Nietzsche anticipates the modern world's drive toward mastery. Yet Heidegger is critical. He believes Nietzsche does not escape metaphysics entirely. By interpreting everything in terms of power, Nietzsche may replace one foundational principle with another. The search for grounding continues, even as it is transformed. This leads Heidegger to position Nietzsche at a turning point. He closes one era of thought, the search for absolute foundations, but does not fully open the next. Heidegger's own philosophy attempts to move beyond this by asking a different question, not what grounds reality, but what it means for something to be at all. Despite their differences, Heidegger's engagement demonstrates Nietzsche's depth. Nietzsche is not only a cultural critic or moral philosopher, he is a thinker whose work challenges the entire structure of Western philosophy. He does not simply question values, he questions the assumptions that made those values possible. If Nietzsche transforms philosophy into diagnosis, Michel Foucault turns that diagnosis into a method. Foucault openly acknowledges Nietzsche as a major influence, especially in his use of genealogy, the analysis of how ideas, institutions, and practices emerge from historical struggles rather than from timeless truths. This is directly Nietzschean. Nietzsche showed that morality has a history. Concepts like good and evil are not eternal. They are the result of psychological and social processes, particularly ressentiment, power dynamics, and cultural transformation. Foucault extends this insight beyond morality. He examines prisons, hospitals, schools, sexuality, and knowledge itself. Instead of asking whether these institutions are justified in abstract terms, he asks, how did they come to exist? What forms of power do they embody? What kinds of individuals do they produce? For Foucault, power is not simply something held by governments or rulers. It is distributed throughout society. It operates through norms, language, expectations, and systems of knowledge. This echoes Nietzsche's idea that power is not only political but psychological and cultural. Just as Nietzsche exposes the hidden drives behind moral systems, Foucault exposes the hidden structures behind social practices. What appears natural or inevitable often turns out to be historically contingent, shaped by specific conditions and interests. For example, the modern concept of normal behavior is not a neutral description. It is part of a system that classifies, disciplines, and regulates individuals. Knowledge and power are intertwined. The way we understand the world influences how we control it. This perspective transforms critique. Instead of arguing that a system is wrong according to universal principles, Foucault shows how it functions. He reveals the mechanisms through which it shapes behavior and identity. This makes critique more precise and often more unsettling. The influence of Nietzsche is clear in both method and tone. There is no appeal to absolute truth, no reliance on fixed moral standards, only careful analysis of how values and practices emerge and operate. At the same time, Foucault diverges from Nietzsche. He is less concerned with individual self-overcoming and more focused on structures of power. His work tends toward historical analysis rather than existential transformation. Yet the underlying impulse is shared, to uncover what lies beneath accepted truths. Nietzsche asked how morality was created. Foucault asks how society is organized. Both reveal that what we take for granted is neither inevitable nor innocent. Nietzsche's influence extends deeply into what is often called postmodern thought, a broad movement associated with thinkers like Jacques Derrida and Jean-François Lyotard. While Nietzsche is not a postmodernist in the historical sense, many of the movement's central themes echo his ideas. At the heart of this connection is his challenge to absolute truth. Nietzsche argues that what we call truth is always shaped by interpretation. Language, concepts, and categories do not simply reflect reality, they organize it. They highlight certain aspects while obscuring others. This does not make truth meaningless, but it makes it contingent. Postmodern thinkers develop this insight further. Derrida, for example, explores how language destabilizes meaning. Words depend on other words. Definitions shift. Texts can be interpreted in multiple ways. Meaning is never fully fixed. Lyotard describes the decline of grand narratives, overarching stories that claim to explain everything, such as progress, reason, or universal emancipation. In a postmodern condition, these narratives lose credibility, and smaller, local perspectives take their place. These developments resonate strongly with Nietzsche's critique of metaphysics and his emphasis on perspectivism. He had already questioned whether a single, unified account of reality was possible. He had already exposed how systems of thought reflect particular forms of life rather than universal truth. However, there are important differences. Some forms of postmodernism move toward relativism, the idea that all interpretations are equally valid. Nietzsche does not fully endorse this. He distinguishes between stronger and weaker interpretations, between perspectives that enhance life and those that diminish it. For him, the question is not simply whether truth exists, but what kind of truth matters. Another difference lies in tone. Postmodern thought often emphasizes fragmentation and indeterminacy. Nietzsche, despite his critique of certainty, seeks affirmation. He wants new forms of meaning to emerge, not merely the endless play of interpretations. Yet the connection remains significant. Nietzsche destabilizes the foundations of Western thought. Postmodernism explores the consequences of that destabilization. It examines how language, culture, and power shape what we take to be real. In this sense, Nietzsche stands at the threshold. He does not belong fully to the modern world of stable truths, nor to the postmodern world of dispersed meanings. He anticipates the transition between them. His influence is therefore not confined to specific doctrines. It appears wherever certainty is questioned, wherever interpretation is foregrounded, and wherever the search for meaning continues without guaranteed foundations. Nietzsche's influence is not confined to philosophy or psychology. It runs through modern literature and art like a current. Writers and artists found in Nietzsche something they could not find in traditional philosophy, a language for conflict, depth, and transformation. One key connection is with Fyodor Dostoevsky, even though Nietzsche read him rather than influenced him directly. Nietzsche famously called Dostoevsky the only psychologist from whom I had something to learn. What he recognized in Dostoevsky was a profound exploration of inner conflict, guilt, freedom, nihilism, and moral struggle. This becomes central to modern literature. Characters are no longer stable moral agents. They are divided, searching, often lost. The question is no longer what is right, but how can one live at all? This is a Nietzschean shift. Writers like Franz Kafka explore alienation, bureaucratic absurdity, and the loss of meaning in modern life. Others, like Thomas Mann, engage directly with Nietzsche's themes: decadence, culture, illness, and the tension between intellect and vitality. In modernist literature, the stable moral universe collapses. Narratives become fragmented. Meaning becomes uncertain. Identity becomes fluid. These developments reflect Nietzsche's diagnosis of a world in which traditional values no longer hold. Art follows a similar trajectory. Nietzsche's early work on tragedy already emphasized the Dionysian, the chaotic, emotional, life-affirming force beneath structured reality. Modern art increasingly embraces this dimension. Instead of presenting harmonious order, it explores dissonance, intensity, and disruption. Music, painting, and theater begin to reflect psychological depth rather than idealized form. The artist, in Nietzsche's sense, becomes a creator of perspectives, someone who shapes experience rather than merely representing it. This influence continues into contemporary culture. Themes of self-creation, identity crisis, moral ambiguity, and existential struggle appear across film, literature, and visual art. The idea that life must be shaped rather than passively accepted has become almost commonplace, yet its philosophical roots trace back in part to Nietzsche. Importantly, Nietzsche's impact here is not doctrinal. Artists do not adopt his philosophy as a system. They absorb his sensibility, his emphasis on tension, transformation, and the confrontation with meaninglessness. He changes how stories are told. He shifts focus from external events to internal struggle, from moral certainty to psychological complexity, from fixed identity to ongoing becoming. In this way, Nietzsche becomes part of the modern imagination itself. Nietzsche's influence has not remained confined to academia or high culture. It has filtered into something much broader, the modern idea of self-development. Today, concepts like self-overcoming, personal growth, confronting discomfort, creating your own path, rejecting limiting beliefs are everywhere. Much of this language echoes Nietzsche, sometimes directly, often indirectly. The idea that the individual must become who they are rather than simply follow inherited norms is deeply Nietzschean. The emphasis on struggle as necessary for growth, on discipline over comfort, on confronting one's weaknesses, these themes run through modern self-help culture. But here the influence becomes complicated. Nietzsche's philosophy is demanding. Self-overcoming for him is not about optimization or productivity. It is not about becoming more efficient, more successful, or more socially validated. It is about transforming the structure of one's values, confronting internal contradictions, integrating conflicting drives, and creating meaning in the absence of external guarantees. This is far deeper than most contemporary interpretations. Modern self-help often simplifies this process into actionable advice. Push harder, think positively, embrace discomfort, dominate your environment. While these ideas can have practical value, they risk reducing Nietzsche's philosophy to motivation. The difference is crucial. Nietzsche is not asking, "How can I improve my life within existing values?" He is asking, "Where do my values come from, and should they be transformed?" This second question is far more destabilizing. It may lead not to greater efficiency, but to a complete reorientation of life. It may require abandoning goals that were previously taken for granted. It may involve confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself and one's culture. Modern psychology, especially in its deeper forms, retains more of Nietzsche's complexity. Ideas about shadow integration, cognitive bias, emotional awareness, and identity formation all reflect the recognition that the self is not transparent. Growth requires confronting what is hidden, not simply reinforcing what is comfortable. In this sense, Nietzsche's influence appears in two layers: a surface layer, where his ideas become motivational slogans, a deeper layer, where they inform serious reflection on identity and meaning. Both are real, but only the deeper layer captures the full weight of his philosophy. Nietzsche challenges the modern individual not merely to improve, but to question, not merely to succeed, but to understand, not merely to adapt, but to create. Nietzsche's relationship to political thought is complex and often misunderstood. He did not write a political program. He did not design a system of government. He did not advocate a specific ideology. Yet his ideas have had significant political impact. This impact operates in two directions: influence, misuse. Both must be understood. On the side of influence, Nietzsche contributes to a deeper analysis of power. He shifts attention away from formal institutions, laws, states, constitutions, and toward the underlying forces that shape them: values, beliefs, psychological drives, cultural narratives. This perspective changes how politics can be understood. Political systems are no longer seen as neutral structures. They are expressions of particular value systems, reflections of what a society considers important, admirable, or necessary. This insight appears across modern political theory. Questions about ideology, discourse, and cultural influence all echo Nietzsche's approach. Politics becomes not only a matter of policy, but of meaning, how societies interpret themselves. At the same time, Nietzsche's critique of equality and herd mentality has attracted controversial interpretations. He challenges the assumption that all individuals are the same in ability or aspiration. He questions whether systems based on uniform equality can fully accommodate human diversity. These critiques can be used to provoke serious philosophical reflection, but they can also be misused. Simplified readings turn Nietzsche into a defender of hierarchy in the crude sense, justifying domination, exclusion, or authoritarian control. As we have already seen, this misinterpretation played a role in 20th century ideological distortions. The danger lies in extracting isolated themes. If one takes Nietzsche's language of strength without his emphasis on self-overcoming, it becomes aggression. If one takes his critique of equality without his suspicion of the state, it becomes authoritarianism. If one takes his concept of power without his psychological depth, it becomes politics reduced to force. These distortions reveal how easily complex ideas can be repurposed. Nietzsche's actual position remains deliberately indirect. He is less concerned with designing political systems than with understanding the conditions under which values arise. He asks how cultures cultivate strength or weakness, how moral frameworks shape behavior, and how individuals can exist within or against these frameworks. This makes his political relevance both powerful and limited. Powerful because he exposes the foundations of political thought. Limited because he does not provide clear prescriptions. His philosophy operates upstream of politics. It influences how people think about values, identity, and power, and through that, it indirectly shapes political life. But it resists being reduced to ideology. Nietzsche does not belong to a political camp. He destabilizes them all. Nietzsche's influence is not just historical. It feels contemporary because the world he diagnosed increasingly resembles the world we inhabit. At the center of this connection is the collapse of certainty. Traditional sources of authority, religion, tradition, stable moral frameworks, have weakened across much of the modern world. Individuals are no longer born into a single, unquestioned system of meaning. Instead, they encounter multiple, often conflicting perspectives. This creates freedom, but it also creates instability. People must choose what to believe. They must define themselves without relying on fixed foundations. Questions that were once settled become open again. What is true? What is right? What gives life meaning? Nietzsche anticipated this condition. His declaration that God is dead describes not just a theological shift, but a cultural transformation. The structures that once provided coherence have fractured. In their absence, individuals face both opportunity and risk. Modern life reflects this tension. On one hand, there is unprecedented possibility. Individuals can pursue diverse paths, adopt new identities, and question inherited norms. Creativity and experimentation flourish. On the other hand, there is fragmentation. Without shared frameworks, meaning can feel unstable. Anxiety, uncertainty, and nihilism become widespread. People search for substitutes, ideologies, identities, movements that can restore a sense of order. Nietzsche helps explain both sides. He shows why the collapse of old values produces disorientation. He also shows why attempts to replace them with rigid new systems can repeat the same problems. The desire for certainty can lead back into dogmatism. This dynamic is visible across modern culture. Debates over truth, identity, morality, and authority often reflect deeper uncertainties about how to live without stable foundations. Nietzsche's analysis of power, perspectivism, and value creation provides a framework for understanding these conflicts. He does not resolve them. He clarifies them. Another reason Nietzsche feels modern is his emphasis on the individual. In a world where traditional roles are less fixed, individuals must actively shape their lives. This aligns with Nietzsche's idea of self-overcoming, the process of continually redefining oneself in response to changing conditions. Yet this freedom is demanding. Without external guidance, responsibility increases. Failure cannot easily be attributed to fate or divine will. The burden of meaning shifts inward. Nietzsche recognizes this burden. He does not offer comfort. He offers a challenge to affirm life without guarantees, to create values without certainty, to endure ambiguity without retreat. This is precisely the situation many people experience today. Nietzsche fits the modern world because he describes its underlying condition, a condition still unfolding. Nietzsche's influence does not end with the thinkers we have discussed. It continues, not as a fixed doctrine, but as a pressure, an ongoing force that reshapes how people think about truth, morality, identity, and meaning. He is not a philosopher who belongs to the past. He belongs to transitional moments. Whenever established values begin to weaken, Nietzsche becomes relevant again. Whenever certainty collapses and individuals are forced to confront the question of meaning directly, his ideas return. This is why he reappears across different fields and generations, not as a system to be followed, but as a challenge that must be faced. His concepts, will to power, perspectivism, self-overcoming, nihilism, are not closed theories. They are tools. They can be used, misused, reinterpreted, and developed in new contexts. This openness ensures both his influence and his vulnerability. Nietzsche's philosophy is powerful because it refuses final answers. But this also means it can be appropriated by those seeking simple conclusions. His legacy is therefore dynamic, shaped by how each generation engages with his work. Some will reduce him to slogans, some will study him academically, some will confront him seriously. Each approach produces a different Nietzsche, yet beneath these variations, a consistent thread remains. Nietzsche forces a confrontation with fundamental questions. What do we value and why? Are those values inherited or created? Can life be affirmed without external justification? What does it mean to become oneself? These questions do not disappear. They evolve as conditions change, but they remain central to human existence. Nietzsche's lasting influence lies in the way he formulates them, sharply, provocatively, and without offering easy resolution. He does not tell us what to think. He makes it difficult not to think. In this sense, Nietzsche's true legacy is not a body of conclusions, but a transformation in how philosophy itself is understood. It becomes less about discovering eternal truths and more about engaging with life as a process of interpretation, conflict, and creation. This process is ongoing. Nietzsche is not finished.